Then we're going to look at some of the barriers that prevent disabled people from feeling empowered in the first place, meaning that they do need a bit of support. We're going to look at the idea of internal bias and also using empathy and compassion to support disabled people in the way that they need to and they want to be supported. We're going to share an anecdotal story which Sarah said that she is happy to share with us. And we are going to then think about a little bit about some of the subtle barriers that perhaps aren't the obvious physical ones that we all think about when we think about barriers faced by disabled people. And then we're going to use all the knowledge that we've gained today to think about how we can develop an inclusive society and an inclusive culture so that everybody can access and do things the way they want to, not the way that's prescribed because they have to manage in a certain way. We're also going to offer you some next steps that you might want to think about. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. So, introductions. So I'm just going to lock myself out of the room from the iPad point of view. So we don't have to look at that anymore. Perfect, excellent. So introductions, I will start. So my name's Essie Hardy. Thank you so much for joining today. So I am the host of this webinar, and it would have been my link that you clicked on to come through. So I run a business called Celebrating Disability, which is a disability inclusion business. So I support other businesses and organisations to be inclusive of disabled people, both as customers and as employees. So I utilise training online and face-to-face, and I offer consulting and also offer auditing as well. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you, Essie. Hiya guys, I'm Sarah Burrell. I run a consultancy in inclusion. I train, I consult, and I run events on inclusion strategy, inclusion and culture fit strategy to help organisations change mindsets and behaviours to enable and empower everyone involved. So that's what I do.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Sarah. Would you mind introducing the next part? I'm trying to get somebody in from the waiting room, but the button doesn't seem to be working.
Okay. So we're here today to discuss the barriers that disabled people may come across that aren't necessarily obvious barriers. We want to think about how we interact on a day-to-day basis with people in general, and how we can empower through our attitudes and mindsets in order to enable a much more open dialogue between and to engage fully with disabled people in order to know more about what is needed and do what we can to mitigate any kind of bias that may happen. We are mindful that barriers come in all shapes and sizes. There are physical barriers, there are attitudinal barriers, and there are organisational barriers. I just want to premise this very quickly. I'm aware I have a speech impairment. We know that, I know that, don't worry. If you can't understand me, please do flag up Essie or myself to repeat if you don't hear. Please, because I actually rather be understood than and not understood. So please do let us know if you can't understand me, and I'll do my best to repeat myself. For just a little preview there. We will I'll just, oh, so Esther, do you want to bring in something there, or are you?
No, I think that's perfect. And I think, I just want to reiterate your point of if anything's misunderstood, either from Sarah's speech impairment or anything that we say is misunderstood, please do flag it up. And the reason why Sarah brings it up in that context is that it's really important that everybody accesses and engages in the way they need to. And this is all part of the learning today, so please don't feel as though you can't ask us to repeat anything that we've said.
Cool. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a really important point to note. So, next up, we were going to be talking about internal bias. So I had you down to talk about that, Sarah. Are you happy to continue?
I am.
Perfect.
I will go ahead and so the complexities of bias, we could be here all day, really, but the specific bias we refer to today is understanding and empathizing with someone's experience, both on a surface level and a mindset level, because actually bias, it goes on in almost all situations. It occurs in daily life all the time. But when we sit back and address our biases towards disabled people, we may not know all of the bias that goes on, because actually a lot goes on in the mind of a disabled person that is very much unseen, and we do not fully know the internal struggles that we may be experiencing, but being so good at mitigating and explaining our situation, it might appear easier than it actually is. So an internal bias can occur even when we walk past a building that does not have an accessible door.
Mm-hmm.
Even that process of walking by is we experience 10 biases just in that one moment. We experience a thinking of, actually, if they haven't thought about our access needs, we don't feel welcome. We feel very unwelcome, because actually that tells us, that expresses to us the conscious, maybe subconscious, but actually now conscious, almost decision that companies, where possible, can implement accessible entrances don't. That can lead in our heads quite quickly down to our inner core of not feeling like we belong.
I completely agree with you. And if I can just add to that, Sarah, I think two things really. I think when we think of bias, we think of things that are unconscious and that are external. But I think as you rightly said, the important thing to really note here is the internal bias that goes on for an individual about how they manage things themselves is so important. And I think also your example that you just shared about walking past a building that's not accessible, and the door, it might be something as simple as the door might not be automatic. I mean, this is something we were talking about yesterday, wasn't it, when we were talking about kind of the content of this webinar and where we were going to go with it. And I was saying, as a wheelchair user, I quite often walk past, even if when I say walk, I mean wheel in my wheelchair, walk past a building or a shop that does look actually quite inviting once you're inside, and it looks like it's got quite good things, whether that be a restaurant or a shop to buy clothes in. but I walk past because I think, well, actually, if I can't get in the door and nobody's coming to help me to get in the door, then I don't want to be in the building. And it's not, and I don't think it's as simple as having a conscious thought about it. I think it's unconscious, that I feel as though, oh, there won't be room for me in there, so I will just walk past. And I think the point of this session today that we're trying to get across is that all these things aren't a conscious thought that we think about, oh, you know, this place isn't going to welcome me, so I'm not going to go in. They're all things that subtly happen internally in the unconscious, that mean that we might not go past today, but then we found another place that is welcoming us more. Or it might be the fact that the tables are too high and we can't join the tables. And again, we're talking a lot about physical disability, but it might be something from a hidden impairment point of view, where perhaps, you know, oh, the lighting's not really that good. So I don't feel as though I would be comfortable staying in this room for a long time. The room is really loud, so I won't be able to hear myself or have that conversation. And these aren't all things that you can mitigate in one go, or even at all, depending on budgets. But I think the more you can become aware of these barriers, and actually the internal processes that go on for disabled people, the more you can mitigate through communication and attitudes and showing people that you value and welcome them.
Great point there, Essie. I think that's, I mean, you said it much better than I did.
Not at all.
With respect to the emotional, the emotion attached to it, and I think that when we go into a place that has a mindful approach, and by that I mean when we communicate with others, we want to, where we want to learn and actually take on board consultation or advice from peers or a disabled person, to properly engage with those with that person requires an active role there, an active listening to fully engage and empathise and understand more about a possible situation that we are admitting to. Actually, I thought I knew, but maybe I don't know as much as I could. Please, would you tell me something about it?
Absolutely.
The way we approach that and the way we ask those questions is crucial. And the behaviours that come out of that are going to be useful behaviours that are applicable and actionable in day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. And the ultimate goal is to become more aware of what we all can do to make the world more an inclusive place for everyone.
I completely agree. And I think that, you know, a lot of the fear around offering support to disabled people is that you're not sure, if the people are not sure what people's reactions are going to be. But I think the more you kind of implement a little bit of what Sarah was talking about, actually active listening, and by active listening, being able to ask the right questions and not making those assumptions, but just having a dialogue, the more the fear will dissipate and the more it will become normal practice, everyday practice that you can do in your everyday situation. And then you're passing that off to your colleagues and your managers and your customers that you're working with. So from the disabled person's point of view, you're showing them that actually you really value and care about how they're feeling and how they're having their support. And from your employees and colleagues' point of view, you're role modeling how it can be and how it does look when it goes well. So Sarah, can we just, we were talking yesterday a little bit about empathy and compassion. Can you just elaborate a little bit? You started to talk about it a moment ago on where that, how to utilize that in the right way, and where that, you know, in as short as you can, where that comes from a little bit, to be able to kind of make this work for a disabled person and for somebody offering that support.
So I think, yeah, thank you. So I'll explain that a bit more. So what I will refer to two kind of theories very quickly to just explain this. So the one theory which I utilise to explain this is the compassionate model, the compassionate mind model, where we have a matrix of conflict. Everyone is made up of a matrix of conflict, of a complicated, intertwined feeling to compassion. We experience drive, we experience threat, and we experience compassion in our own way. And everyone has different levels of self-compassion and self-worth. And when we utilize our energy in very different, we all utilize energy in very different ways, and this can detract or remove energy from places where actually maybe we could employ more, but actually given the subtle or unsubtle barriers we experience day-to-day life, be it mental health issues like anxiety or depression or personality disorders, whatever we experience, or a disability where it affects your physical and mental well-being, or a cognitive issue that you may have, we all spend our energy in very different ways, and some spend more than others on just getting out of the house. I think that's an important thing to remember when we approach and want to learn more about a section of someone. We have to be mindful we approach it in a delicate way without closed questions and without assumption that they'll be snappy, or that it may not go as well as they thought it would. So I refer to these two theories to explain how we work and how we may be different. And actually, when we do spend our energy, we have little left. We have very little left to address what might be seen as simple things in life. So I refer to here an example that we discussed yesterday, I think, about getting on a train or getting across the road. So when we all leave the house, we leave the house in a very different way to each other. We spend energy, perhaps, where people may not. And when we have spent all our energy, referring to the compassionate mind model again, we have little left for drive. We have little left to not be in the threat zone. When we're in a zone of threat and our compassion and empathy has been spent, we may react in ways that we wouldn't normally react. When, for example, when I am crossing a road, more than 7 out of 10 times, I'm fine crossing the road. On the 3 out of 10 I'm not, and this is in order to be independent and live my life independently, there is no choice for me but to interact with a stranger. at a very critical time, at a threat zone, I recognise that actually that interaction between that stranger and myself is very important. It's important in the future thoughts in that stranger about me and about that situation. And I'm mindful to employ a personable character in that interaction to ensure that I do not leave a mark that is defensive or threatening. Because actually, when you spend all your energy, it's very difficult to act like that. But I see it as a responsibility to be mindful of how I interact with others in that scenario to open up further that person and not shut it down, so that the future interactions of that person with another disabled person will not be detrimental to them.
Can I just pause for a second, Sarah? Because I think that we should pause and really take note of what you've just said. Because when you told me about this the other day, I thought, oh my gosh, that is not. I mean, we are both disabled people and we both have very different impairments, but that is not how I would react when I felt threatened. So when Sarah and I were discussing, and I think my hat goes off to you for being able to react in that kind of really responsible way. So when Sarah kind of told me about that yesterday, I thought, I was comparing it to another danger zone where people would find themselves, and hopefully not too often, but about to fall off the edge of a cliff. So when you are about to fall off the edge of the cliff, you don't go, oh, hello, nice to meet you. Please, please, if you feel comfortable to, do you mind grabbing my hand and pulling me back from the edge? You go, oh, bleep, 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 and probably nothing else would come out. And that would be my reaction, not because I didn't want to make people feel, I wanted to make people feel bad, but because my immediate reaction would be save myself. So Sarah's example of actually being in the middle of a road and freezing and still having the whereabouts to say, oh, hello, do you mind stopping to help me? How are you today? How is your day going? And make everything about them and nothing about her, I think is tremendously, I can't think of another word but brave. And I think that brave is the right word in this situation. Not brave because you're disabled, but brave because you're in imminent danger and you're still thinking about another person over yourself, which is what brave actually means. So when Sarah is talking about spending energy, I think that is such a good example of how probably a lot of your energy is used up in that one situation. And actually to be able to do that, where the majority of us, including myself, would not react in such a way, is kind of a bit mind-boggling and mind-blowing, as well as everything else. And I think that's a really important thing to note. When kind of thinking about the support and the experiences that brought that disabled person to where they are, when they're asking for a bit of extra support, think about what they've gone through. I can see a thumbs up from Jennifer. Thank you very much, Jennifer, exactly. And I think, I know that you're a professional, Sarah, but so am I. That is still not going to be my reaction in the middle of the road or on the top of a cliff. So I think it's really important to I really just wanted to pause on that moment to really think about the impact of that for that disabled person, whether it be you or whether it be another disabled person. And actually, I completely understand what you're saying, but I think that when somebody reacts in a slightly less kind of a brave way in that situation, it shouldn't impact on what people think about other disabled people.
I think it's important to remember that we're in an interaction where we have spent our energy And just to explain that a little bit more, in the threat zone, we don't often employ responses. We employ reactions. We employ a defensive reaction often when we have spent energy. We do not exhibit the wherewithal to be necessarily very polite, or it can, in some circumstances, it can be fully understandable when actually people do not act like that. What I do day to day, to me as a professional person in the inclusion sphere, I do see that as an important thing, but I completely understand the difference between situations and how different people are able or not able to respond the way that is ideal. Because actually, we are very rarely in that ideal circumstance. We are often fighting the threat, we are fighting the drive, we are fighting the compassion, and we just get into the day. And actually putting into context of a day, of a week, of a year, it may not be that we act in that certain way. I'm so sorry. 1 second.
That's fine. I was just, it's a good point, Sarah. I was just, whilst Sarah is doing what she's doing, I was just going to talk a little bit, just following on from Sarah saying about some of those subtle barriers that disabled people face that might lead them to react in that way. So, I mean, we all can think of some of the physical barriers, for example, lifts instead of ramps for wheelchair users, or no step-free access, and those kind of things. But some of the subtle barriers around the attitudes of people are the ones that are paramount to how much energy we have on a daily basis. So if I can use myself as an example, I am a physically disabled wheelchair user, but some of the subtle barriers around the attitude come when, for example, I approach a train station and ask a train guard to help me on the train. And the train guard, instead of saying, oh, of course, let me just get the ramp, yells at me for not booking in advance. And so I have to spend 5 minutes explaining to them that I didn't book in advance because I didn't know what time I was coming to the station. And actually it is my right to turn up without booking, and all of those. And all of this conversation is going on the side of the platform instead of helping me on the train. So the conversation about delaying the train is being delayed because of the argument. But that's besides the point. But these conversations go on a daily basis. So whilst my energy is being used up on the conversation itself, my energy is also being spent on worrying about the conversation that's about to happen. I might then get to my destination, and as I said, those physical barriers might get in the way, so I can't get into the room because the door's not accessible. I might go to a networking event and everybody's standing up, so I can't join in the conversation because I can't reach the conversation, and the music and the noise is too loud, so I can't. So instead I sit in the corner and wait for people to come to me. There are also the subtle barriers that people don't think about. For example, as a wheelchair user going into a business event, people assume that I can't hold the conversation. So half of my energy is being spent explaining to them and showing them that I can have an intellectual conversation with them. And then the subtle barriers of going back on the way home, having that support when I get home. So I have support from personal assistants who want to chat to me because they're nice and want to find out about my day. But if I've had a long day, sometimes the last thing I want to do is talk to somebody else. So I have to take up a lot more of my energy or hold on to some of my energy to be able to have that conversation. And also, I'm an employer, so sometimes those conversations are around things that they're not happy with. So I may have had a whole day out at a conference and then have to come back and talk about employer related issues. And I can't tell them not to, because, you know, they're there to work, and that's the time when they can talk about their issues. So those are just some of the examples of subtle barriers. Obviously, I'm talking from the point of view of a wheelchair user, physically disabled wheelchair user. Other impairment groups and other people with different impairments would have different barriers. But the point that we're trying to make is that those barriers aren't always the obvious physical ones that we think about on a daily basis. Okay, brilliant. So can I just have you have a button on the bottom. If you hover over my face, there's a button that should say something like reactions. Can you just put a thumbs up or something to show me that you're still with us, and that we're making sense? Jennifer, I can see your hand. And Samantha and Joanne, thank you very much. John, excellent. I'm so glad. I'm really glad. Okay, brilliant.
Forgive me for over-chatting if I do.
No, that's fine, Sarah. That's fine. Thank you very much. So in a second, we're going to go on to next steps. But, you know, because I've been watching the time, we're a bit ahead of ourselves. Sarah, is there anything else that you would like to add before we go on to next steps? And then questions and answers.
I think that just to be, we do realise that being able to admit not knowing something or wanting to learn more can be challenging for people. And we are here to support you guys in your dialogue, in your engagement strategy, because we see it as a very important point. And the way and the methods we choose for engagement have to be as diverse as the people we are engaging with. And we, SNI, represent SNI. We do not speak for all disabled people when we say I, because actually as we've just seen, my experiences and Esther's experiences are very different. But we are very mindful of others having different barriers and different issues to tackle with. And where someone might spend their energy in social interactions, some might spend reading or walking to a bus stop, whatever it is. People spend their energy in very different ways and very different timelines as well.
Yeah.
Just to sort of bring it back to being mindful that we are all different. We are here to support you guys in that step of engagement and hopefully eventually inclusive steps towards your organisational strategy or just wanting to know more.
Thank you very much. No, I completely agree with that. I would add to that, or just remind people about the fact that everybody is intersectional. And I realise that is maybe an overspent word, but what I mean by that is that we are not, Sarah and I are not just disabled people. Sarah is a disabled person with a husband and a homeowner and a daughter and a sister and all of those things. I'm a disabled person and I am a daughter and I'm a mixed race person. And I am a business owner and I am an employer and I am an avid Robbie Williams fan and those things are important to note because, as Sarah said, we represent ourselves. We don't represent other disabled people, but it's so important to remember that everybody isn't just what you're seeing right now. Everybody has lots of different elements that take up lots of different bits of energy, not necessarily in a bad way. Robbie Williams takes up my energy in a very good way, but it's still taking energy. It's still meaning that some of our focus is somewhere else. It's still meaning that we have other places to go and other people to see. So whilst we can't, you know, on the street, for example, a disabled person may not be able to stop and answer all of your questions. That's not because they're being grumpy necessarily. That might be because they're on their way somewhere, or they've just come back from somewhere, or they're doing something. So remembering that a disability is only part of what makes a person is so important. So we're going to quickly, or for a few minutes, focus on some next steps you can take. So I will, when I'm sending the email out in the next 24 hours, I will put these next steps in the email as well, but we'll just talk about them now. So when we were thinking about the next steps, we thought of 3 things that you might want to think about and might want to do. So the first one is to consider how today's discussion can impact on your next interaction with a disabled person, and what, if anything, if needed, you will do differently. So that could either be a disabled person if you work in an organization or a business. It could be a customer that you interact with. It might be a colleague that you work with, or it might just be a person that you come across on the street. As disabled people, I, for example, ask for support from a lot of people in a lot of different ways when I'm just out and about, whether it be opening a door, whether it be putting a ramp down, whether it be picking something up that I drop, whether it be asking for directions. So it doesn't necessarily have to be in a professional context. So your next interaction with disabled people, consider what you could take away from this conversation, and maybe to help you to have a more successful, a better interaction with a disabled person the next time. Number 2 is to assert the active listening that Sarah was talking about earlier. Sarah, would you like to talk about that a bit more?
So, okay.
As a next step.
Yeah, so just to be mindful and try, this is a very difficult thing to do. And we recognise that, and people, this is a skill. This is not something you pick up in a day. This is a practice skill, and it requires you to remind yourself to listen. And by truly active listening, we remove ourselves from that moment in time. We remove that planning on what we're going to say. We remove the, oh, what I say next is really important and more important than that person. We actively catch ourselves in a moment where we might want to employ active listening, and just to engage and register that, okay, I'm really going to try here to listen to this person and try and not be distracted by internal future conversation that might occur. Because by doing this, we take on knowledge. We assume nothing, and we try to understand people differently. And it's a real task, and this is not an easy step, but if we can try to encourage you to employ that, or even catch yourself in a moment when you can catch yourself, you know, is really helpful, and that can build up and up. Yeah.
There were a few, I think that's really good, Sarah. There are a few exercises that you can use to practice the skill of active listening with a partner. So what I will do is when I send this out, I will send a couple of exercises out that you might want to try out with a partner, because I think that is really useful. And I think we're all guilty of that, aren't we? Thinking about what we're going to say next and waiting for our turn to speak, and then listening and missing what the person's actually saying because of what we're doing. So the third step that we thought you might like to take is, as we said before, we don't represent all disabled people. I slipped up with my language before. Sarah and I do represent disabled people, but we don't represent every single disabled person. It would be impossible. So we thought a good thing that you might like to do is research what other disabled people say on the subject, or just in general. You may want to look on Twitter or on LinkedIn for other disabled activists and other disabled advocates and see what they talk about, and what their styles are that come out of what they're talking about. One area that you might want to look at is a podcast that I host called Part of Me, which is on the Celebrating Disability website, where I interview other disabled people on their experiences of the workplace and working as disabled people. So there's 23 interviews on there, and that would give you a really good insight into kind of the minds and the experiences of other disabled people as well. So you might want to check that out. And again, I will add a link. So that is it. That is the webinar that Sarah and I wanted to host today. Does anybody have any questions that they might want to ask? We have just over 10 minutes, so we should be able to fit quite a few questions in. So you can either unmute yourself or you can type something in the chat box.
Right.